This meeting is being recorded.
Oh, right. Did everybody hear this?
Yes,
Meeting
I think so. Sorry about that.
I got interrupted by this. So, yeah, we're going to have a presentation by Andrew Milne, who is senior lecturer at the University of Bordeaux, Montaigne in France, who's a member of the research group CLIMAS, and that we're particularly happy to have speaking in this session today because he's one of the particularly active members of MIDIB. And in fact, before he was a senior lecturer at the University of Bordeaux, he worked for 2 years on a postdoctoral research project on the migration of English speakers to the city of Pau in the southwest of France. And most importantly for us, he completed his PhD quite recently in 2021 at the University of Toulouse Jean Jaurès, under the supervision of none other than Vincent Latour, who's here. And so Andrew has been, and this is why I was saying Andrew has been a pretty active participant in our activities at MIDIB for the last couple of years. He's written and edited books related to the question of national identity, as well as the history of Britain, the Commonwealth. His main research interest is, of course, as is clear with the title of his presentation today, immigration, and immigration into the UK, and in particular the Sikh diaspora in both France and the UK. He's interested also in issues of collective memory, nationalisms, national identity. And he's currently under contract with Routledge India to publish his book called The Sikhs of France and the UK, A Powerful Diaspora and the Quest for Recognition. So, Andrew, I think we're ready to listen to your presentation. If you're ready.
So thank you very much, Romain and Vincent, for inviting me today. So as you said, I'm going to go through really, I'll stick to the structure of the book that will be published, which is entitled Sikhs of France and the United Kingdom. So it's a comparison of really the Turban campaign. So I'm going to stick to the structure of the book, which mainly deals with Sikhs of France and Sikhs of the United Kingdom, and the Turban campaigns, or the prosecution of either the French state or establishments in the United Kingdom by Sikhs at various stages in post-Second World War Britain and France. Right up until recent years in the 21st century. So obviously in the book I deal with, first of all, why Sikhs might be of interest. And as you can see on the second PowerPoint, so Vincent, if you could change, thank you very much. So I deal with why Sikhs might be of interest. So in the beginning, because Sikhism and Sikhs are relatively little known in the world, so Sikhs are, of course, they're of interest because they're the fifth largest religion in the world. There are approximately 25 to 30 million Sikhs in the world. So Sikh comes from the Sanskrit word of Shishaya, means student. The religion which we call today in the majority of our languages, which is Sikhism, is in fact an invention in the 1830s by British administrators, adding that suffix to Sikhs. Sikhs don't actually refer to their religion as Sikhism. They refer to it as either Gurmat or Gurumat, which means the intentions or the principles of the Guru. They also use other words such as dharma, which refers to the religious or social or moral obligations of Sikhs and Sikhism, such as, for example, the fact that Sikhs must be self-interested or provide for other members of the community or the Sangat that are on the same path as them historically in Sikhism, walking along that same pathway. Sikhs tend to use the word Sikhi, meaning the way of life based on the Guru's teachings. The second reason why Sikhs might be of interest is because they represent a diaspora, which is relatively consequential. In other words, they are, in the definition of that word, they are spread out. 90% of Sikhs actually live in India at the present time, but Sikhs are to be found all over the world. And it's a pretty consequential diaspora. The majority of Sikhs are located in Canada, where there are 750,000 Sikhs. In the United Kingdom, there are just over 500,000. But Sikhs in Europe are the country that has the most Sikhs in Europe is Italy, perhaps surprisingly or not. But Sikhs can be found everywhere, all over the world, even in Japan, which might seem surprising because Japan traditionally doesn't have a high level of immigration. Sikhs are also, I think, of interest because they represent a stateless nation. To use the words of Montserrat Guillermo, that so a nation being a group of people that wishes to live together and has certain things in common with each other, such as a language, a culture. Of course, that's not to essentialize Sikhs and who they are, because of course they live very differently to each other according to the country that they might be located in. So Sikhs even in India don't live the same way as Sikhs in the United Kingdom or in France because of questions of national identity. And Sikhs are a stateless nation, so they don't have a state. They did do so at one point between 1799 and 1849 under the auspices of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, and the Sikh Empire existed at that time. And of course, Punjab is the last place to be annexed by the British under colonial rule in 1849. So, and you can see on the right-hand side, there's a painting that comes. There was an exhibition at the Wallace Collection in 2024 dedicated to Ranjit Singh and the Sikh Empire, in fact. So it is all of interest for those reasons. I also think that there's a question of religious ignorance and the fact that, despite the fact that Sikhism is the 5th largest religion in the world, and there are a number of Sikhs in the Sikh diaspora, there is religious ignorance related to Sikhism. And often, even in the United Kingdom, where Sikhs are either relatively well integrated or relatively well known because of colonial rule, I think that there is some sort of Sikhs are highly visible, but at the same time invisible. People don't recognize who a Sikh is, and they might confuse them with other religions. And Sikhs are quite concerned about that, that they might be related to other. They might be associated with other religions. And I also think that Sikhism is, or Sikhs are of interest because of their high level of intra-community connection and connectedness, which crosses borders. And we will see that later. In particular, the funding of the court cases in France is actually funded by British Sikhs and American Sikhs through international Sikh organizations. So obviously this word that I mentioned earlier on, Sangat, the community that is walking along the same path and believes in the same elements of the religion. So what is Sikhism exactly? Well, Sikhism is a religion. It must be understood that, so Sikhism is a religion that is developed at some point in the 15th century by the first guru, who is Guru Nanak. So at the end of the 15th century, beginning of the 16th century in Punjab, India, Sikhs believe in one God. So it's a monotheist religion. Waheguru is the name of that God. So the first guru is Guru Nanak, and in the book I go through all of the gurus, but in particular today, for time constraints, I will only go through perhaps a few of them that have contributed to important elements, and in particular the development of what Anthony Smith calls ethno-symbolism, and how that might have shaped and had an effect on the development of Sikh identity. Vincent, can you advance the...
Yeah, sure.
Please, thank you. So there are 10 successive gurus that have shaped Sikhism. So obviously the first one is Guru Nanak, who is perhaps considered as the most important, because he is the one that developed Sikhism. There are particular reasons why he might develop that religion, in particular because of the belief that there are certain elements in Hinduism and in Islam that might not correspond to ideas that Guru Nanak has in the beginning about questions of equality and so in particular the caste system. That doesn't mean to say that the caste system is eliminated in Sikhism, because it still is very much present, and there are some recent there's recent research which is related to the consequences of that. The other Sikhs, so the first is Guru Nanak, the last human guru is Guru Gobind Singh, so at the end of the 17th century, beginning of the 18th century. There are other important gurus that in particular Guru Arjan, that compiles the Adi Granth, which is the Holy Scriptures, and builds Harmandir Sahib, which is the Golden Temple of Amritsar, which is one of the most important holy places for Sikhism. Sikhism is not just located in Punjab. It's mainly located in the north of India, in Punjab, but is located, it's pan-Indian religion. There are other holy sites across India. So Guru Hargobind introduces, sorry, if I just go back to the Adi Granth is particular because it's written in, so it's compiled of not just Sikh texts or poems or about the life of Guru Nanak, but it's also composed of borrowings from texts from Hinduism and also Islam at the same time. So and it's written in a particular script which becomes associated with Sikhs, which enables or contributes to the shaping of the identity of Sikhs and Sikhism. So Guru Hargobind at the end of the 16th century, beginning of the 17th century, introduces military tradition to defend Sikhism against persecution. And it should be understood that Sikhs represent a minority in India. If there are only between 25 and 30 million Sikhs in India, they're very much a minority in a Hindu majority, which of course today in particular has consequences for them, with the rise of Hindutva and pro-nationalist Hindu values. So this military tradition, which is shaped at the end of the 16th, beginning of the 17th century, and also has consequences for the place of Sikhs in the British Empire, and in particular in the British Raj. So and I make that distinction because Sikhs are moved all over Europe, and in particular participate extensively in World War I and World War II. Guru Gobind Singh is the person, or is the guru, who is responsible really for establishing what's known as the Khalsa, which is the group of saint soldiers. So the baptism of Sikhs in 1699. He contributes to the distinct identity which is developed by using this ethno-symbolic, by shaping ethno-symbolism and providing elements which become very particular and ingrained in Sikh identity. Can you continue for me, Vincent, please? So the Guru Granth Sahib, so I said earlier on that Guru Gobind Singh is the last human guru. So in fact, the Guru Granth Sahib, which is another name for the Adi Granth, which is the collection of holy scriptures, is declared after the death of Guru Gobind Singh, is declared as the eternal Guru. So the holy scriptures are revered as almost a living entity by Sikhs, and it serves as another form of identity and this ethno-symbolism of Sikhs. If we just return to Guru Gobind Singh and the Khalsa and this the establishment of these elements which become known as the 5Ks in English, or the Panj Kakar, then Sikh identity today is situated around these 5 elements, also these ethno-symbolic elements, which are really the reasons why there are issues in certain countries. So of course, these 5Ks are Kesh, Kanga, Kara, Kashera, and the Kirpan. So they all represent something. So that the Kesh means that Sikhs can't or shouldn't cut their hair. It's respect for God's creation. The Kanga, the wooden comb that they carry with them, represents cleanliness and discipline. The Kara, which is a steel bracelet, represents the bond with God and righteousness. The Kashera is cotton undergarments representing modesty and self-control. And the Kirpan, which is a small sword or a dagger, which is the defense of truth and justice. So these symbolic elements are developed by Guru Gobind Singh when the Khalsa is created. And it's really some of those 5 elements, in particular the kesh and uncut hair. Technically speaking, the wearing of a turban is for practical reasons, but it's transformed through history into something that becomes essential for Sikhs. And so this in particular is really the center or the heart of conflict or discordance between the countries in which Sikhs have settled, and also the Kara becomes problematic, in particular because it represents a piece of jewelry, and we will see that how it's used in some of the court cases, or in the United Kingdom at least, and the Kirpan also becomes problematic, in particular carrying weapons on people in a post-2001 world becomes highly problematic, and we can see that Sikhs gain exemptions, in particular in the United Kingdom, from that because of their power. Sikhs are the only people in the United Kingdom who are authorized to carry that weapon on them, and even school children are allowed to carry it. They're proposed, or it's suggested that they school authorities put forward the possibility of carrying a fake kirpan, but if they refuse, then they have the right to carry a real kirpan with them, and even in certain cases, even boarding planes in pre-2001 was allowed to carry the kirpan, and even pilots today. They're allowed to board. It's confiscated while they're on board, but it's given back to them afterwards. So I think these are the reasons why, and if we move on now to deal with, so the main part of the book deals with these 2 elements of Sikhs in France and Sikhs in the United Kingdom, and in particular, I deal at the very beginning of that chapter on Sikhs in France, the historical context, very briefly, of how Sikhs might have come to live in France, because it's not perhaps the first thing that comes to mind, although it possibly should do, because there has been a French presence in India from 1668 through trading posts. Obviously, there is a difference. Can you continue for me? Vincent, please. So there's a difference, obviously, and as you can see in the map that's on the right-hand side, the trading posts of Sikhs around India, in particular, obviously the most famous is Pondicherry or Puducherry. So France maintains control over these settlements until the early 1960s, which might seem surprising because it's often forgotten that there is that presence, and it's not one that's spoken about very often in French in French identity. There's a difference in approach between the French presence in India and the British presence in India. The French one is really maintained in terms of commercial trading posts. So that's not to say that the British don't have a commercial connection with India, but they have an administrative colonial connection which transforms the shape of those relations. So if we look at Sikh, move on to Sikh, how Sikhs end up in India. So Sikhs start coming really to India, to France, like Indians, but the majority of Sikhs arrive in the post-1980s and the 1990s. So they continue to arrive today, but it's possibly different types of people that are arriving today. So in the 1980s, of course, because of separatist movements, Operation Blue Star, Indira Gandhi sending in tanks to Harimandir Sahib, or the Golden Temple of Amritsar, to quash and to quell insurgency attempts. So there ensues what the Sikhs term to be more than just a massacre, but an attempt to annihilate Sikh people with complicity of the police and the state. There are discrepancies over the number of people who might have been killed at that time, which range from about 3,000 Sikhs to 30,000 Sikhs, which is disputed today. But there is recognition by the Indian state that there is contribution by the police at that time to what perhaps in the Western world is termed as a pogrom rather than a genocide, but the Sikhs refer to it as a genocide. So there are approximately 25,000 to 30,000 Sikhs today in France who mainly came post-1980s, and that's in particular because of tightening of immigration rules in the United Kingdom. So the United Kingdom tends to concentrate much more on the population that it already has within the United Kingdom to try and solve issues with that population, and bans or bars other people from coming in. So those Sikhs who suffer from the consequences of Operation Blue Star are seeking other places. And the Sikhs that I have spoken to or spoke to and interviewed have an idea about France being a country of human rights and democracy, but they have no idea at all that it's a secular country, and they have very little idea of what that secularism actually means. And they believe that because it's a democracy that they will find complete religious freedom to exercise their religion and wear their religious clothing, which of course post 2004 becomes problematic. So the Sikh population is mainly in Île-de-France, but I have recently been in contact with other Sikhs who are now moving outside of Île-de-France, and perhaps subgroups of Sikhs, the Lubana Sikhs, for example, or the type of Sikhs that might be coming today. I was recently in contact with a postdoctoral researcher that is located in Rouen, for example. So they are expanding outside and creating upon the same model as always, creating their gurdwaras or their temples in locations where they become greater and greater numbers of Sikhs. So the challenges that Sikhs have met are and include strict secularism of France, which I think we should keep the word laïcité because it's very particular to France and how it affects Sikhs. And of course, this is a key issue post 2004, in particular in schools. But prior to that, it's already an issue. And the wearing of turban becomes, as we will see, in the following cases. So the restrictions on religious attire and religious garb. So in the book, I go through chronologically the list of bring together the court cases that have been brought against mainly the French Republic. So there's a great difference between the court cases in Britain and the court cases in France. In Britain, they are reserved for private institution. The state hasn't been prosecuted. In France, they are prosecutions of states, of the state. So obviously, prosecuting a private institution and prosecuting a state is not the same, and so therefore it becomes more problematic by definition. So Ranjit Singh is really the first person, and I interviewed Ranjit Singh. So he's an elderly gentleman at the present time. He came as a refugee. He fled. He was in the. He perhaps doesn't represent the idea of a refugee that people might have, or he does represent perhaps the reality of the situation. He was an officer in the Indian Air Force. He was a pilot, so he fled India because of his involvement in insurgency. He came to Seine-Saint-Denis. In 2002, he had a residency permit. He was denied the renewal of his residency permit in 2002 because he refused to remove his turban. So he, first of all, of course, exhausted all of the possibilities in France before taking that case to the UN Human Rights Committee. He was found to, his case was found to be admissible, that France had acted against the exercising of his freedom of religion. And that was filed in 2009, and the decision was given in 2011. And the dates are important because it's not the first case. It's the first case that exists, but it's not the first case that actually goes to an extra French committee to evaluate human rights. It's also interesting that you will notice in the following cases that there will always systematically be a distinction between the UN Human Rights Committee, which systematically finds Sikhs to their cases to be admissible, and the European Court of Human Rights, which finds it to be inadmissible systematically. So there's this contradiction that exists between these two courts of last resort, or the highest committees that can pass decisions on and advise. Remember, it's only an advisory role. It doesn't have any possibility of forcing the countries which are member to those institutions to actually carry out their decisions. And in particular, in contrast, Sukul Phul, who is in fact a British engineer, who I also interviewed. So in 2003, he was traveling through. So this is all prior to laws. So it's post 2001, but it's prior to laws of religious clothing in schools in France in 2004. Sukul Phul is traveling through Strasbourg airport. He's asked to remove his turban. He refuses. He says it's not normal. People don't have to remove their trousers. He says, you're not asking me to take my trousers off, so why would you ask to take my turban off? He refuses. There's a lengthy discussion. His flight is cancelled, so he leaves. But he decides to take it to he files a complaint at the European Court of Human Rights. It's found to be inadmissible. Systematically, the European Court of Human Rights states that those cases are, France acts with perhaps too much severity, and that it's perhaps too much in terms of the reason why they might want to be doing it. But the European Court of Human Rights recognizes each time that France can do what it wants, and decisions related to this type of element are purely and simply the decision of France, and nobody else can decide that. So Sukulful loses that case. So the next time he travels through the airport, he's not asked to remove his turban. The case kind of gets dropped. But also there's, in 2003, there is this perhaps tightening of controls in airports. The first cases of that are consequences post 2004 of the schools and the new law wearing religious clothing. The first cases are Bikramjit Singh, who is excluded, first of all, from the school, the secondary school of Louise Michel, which is located in Bobigny in the Department of 93. He's wearing a keski, which is a small turban for young adults. And he's isolated with the following two people in this court case. I've distinguished them because the court cases are filed at different times. So I interviewed also Bikramjit Singh. Can you continue for me, please, Vincent? Bikramjit Singh takes that to the Human Rights Committee, the UN Human Rights Committee, and it's ruled. So he wins his case. It's filed prior to Ranjit Singh, but the decision is given after Ranjit Singh's decision is given. But his case is also found to be admissible. But the Human Rights Committee says that the expulsion is disproportionate. To the boys are. The problem is that the boys are isolated in the cafeteria. They're not allowed to attend school. They're not allowed to attend classes. And the UN Human Rights Committee states that is disproportionate to what happened. He has to leave that school, and in fact he goes to another school, and which is what the majority of the times this is what happens, that Sikhs end up leaving French state schools. They consider at some point creating their own schools. They don't actually do it, and extracting themselves completely from the education system. They end up going to Catholic schools, in fact. So they go to religious schools, which is quite surprising that the Catholic schools allows them to wear their turbans and to exercise freedom of religion completely. The other two boys I've put together, Jasvir Singh and Ranjit Singh. So they're also excluded at the same time from the same school, Louise Michel Secondary School. They take their case to, can you continue, please, Vincent? Thank you. So they take their case to the European Court of Human Rights. So it's interesting that the same case, which is filed more or less the same time, 2008, 2009, is deemed to be at the UN Human Rights Committee to be admissible, but in the European Court of Human Rights, it's deemed to be inadmissible. So there's this contradiction between the two that takes place constantly, and yet it's the same case. So there are other cases which are also revealing of this contradiction. So 2004, this Shingaraman Singh, he has his driving license stolen. He's refused a replacement of it. So he takes it to the European Court of Human Rights. It's filed in 2007 and is deemed also inadmissible. It's interesting that at about the same time, in fact, just a year prior to that, 2003, there is this famous case of the Carmelite nun who is also attempting to renew her driving license. Sister Adalberta, who is assisted by Bernadette Chirac, who intervenes in the Var to state that she can remain in her religious clothing and wear her hair covering in 2003, that she should be allowed, and she is allowed to renew her driving license. So at the same time, there is this contradiction that the Sikhs are not allowed to do it. So it's interesting that Shinga Jaraman Singh. So he loses his case at the European Court of Human Rights, but when he takes it to the UN Human Rights Committee, it's deemed to be admissible. So which highlights once again the disparity between these two organizations. Finally, the most recent cases are 2011, and it is related to Harpal Singh and Amarjit Singh. So I've spoken to Harpal Singh and interviewed him. It's under the same circumstances. The boys are young, 14, 15 years old. The schools refuse, the school in Goussainville, Romain Rolland refuses to allow them to wear their turban, or they're not wearing the turban, they're wearing what's called a rumal, which is for younger boys before they move up to wearing a young adult turban, which is called a rumal, and this is a top knot on the top of their head. They tie their hair up and then they cover just the top knot of that. So the boys are called in by the school. They're asked to. It's suggested that they cut their hair. So obviously there is an international Sikhs joined together. All of these court cases are financed by British Sikhs and British organisations, which we will come to later on. I'll explain to Majinder Paul Kaur, who is the legal representative of one of those organisations who I spoke to. So the rector of the academy, or the academic board, apologises for the ignorance or not knowing really about Sikhism, and apologises, and kind of it goes away. The problem is overlooked, and there's no court case that takes place. So really, to sum up those court cases, I think that they prove that there are strong intra-community ties between Sikhs, and notably through the Gurdwaras, which is on an international basis also. That could you continue, Vincent, please? So that Sikhs in all of the interviews that I've carried out always state that they are hardworking, which they are. They tend to have a higher rate of property ownership, for example. They tend to be generally richer than the average person, for example, in the United Kingdom. If we look at that, they also make a distinction, or they underline the distinction with other religious minorities who might be facing similar restrictions. They seem to emphasize systematically that their participation in wars, for example, in the army, because they are considered to be, at some point, as we will see, a martial race. And they try and distance themselves from being confused with other religious minorities. And really, this is emblematic of the religious tensions that might exist in some of the states, or in particular in France, because of secularism. So in the United Kingdom, the demographics are much greater. They're very different questions of the reason why they might be in the United Kingdom. So there are far more Sikhs in the United Kingdom, 500,000 at the present time, over 500,000. That number is expanding by 100,000 over approximately 10 years. So that's a consequential expansion. Can you continue for me, Vincent, please, sir? So Sikhs start arriving in the United Kingdom. The first known Sikh to have arrived in the United Kingdom is obviously Maharaja Dulip Singh in 1854. So he's the last Maharaja of the Sikh Empire. He arrives, he's very young, about 10 years old. So he's He's taken under the auspices of Queen Victoria, and he's provided with money on the civil list. This is when Punjab is annexed. You'll notice that there is a difference in spelling of Panjab and Punjab. So PU is the anglicized version of Panjab, and Panj means five, so it's the land of the five rivers, really. But Sikhs, for the majority of the time, start arriving and settling in Britain in post-World War II. And in particular after the partition of India, and Sikhs who don't have a state at that time. Can you continue, Vincent, please, sir? So this is earlier. You can continue. So earlier than in France. So there are greater colonial ties, perhaps. Earlier, at least, so from 1600. In particular, there are various battles which are very important in the colonial history of the colonialism of British India. So including the Battle of Plassey, and in particular the Mutiny of 1857, where Sikhs play a major role in the conquest of, they are considered to be the martial race, and they solidify British rule, and they often use that. This is often part of the reason why they demand and request exceptional circumstances. So Punjab is deemed by the British as being the land of the martial race, and becomes the key recruitment areas or the recruiting ground for the Indian army. Of course, the great regalia of Sikhs. They're encouraged to fight in full battle regalia and look very impressive in their turbans and the other symbols of their religion. So they are considered to be a race, a completely different group of people. So this means that, generally speaking, the periods of migration for Sikhs to the United Kingdom starts with soldiers and traders at the 19th century, post 1854, when Maharaja Dulip Singh arrives in Britain. But then afterwards, workers start arriving in the post-war Reconstruction period, of course, under the British Nationality Act, and the fact that they possess British nationality, and so therefore they're able to arrive in Britain freely as British subjects, and having British nationality, or at least British nationality of the colonies. So post 1947 partition, many Sikhs leave India due to the instability that they encounter, and the fact that they don't have a state. And of course, leaving after 1984 in Operation Blue Star, those who can go to Britain, who can prove that they have some ancestral or genealogical link as a British person, then they are allowed to go. Others have to file asylum applications to other countries. And this is because of the tightening of immigration laws. There are various identity struggles and turban campaigns, which are not the same as in France. So the key cases in the book, I go through the key cases which start really in the 1960s. So at the end of the 1959, at the end of the 1950s. So the first person really, Singh Sagar, Gianni Sundar Singh Sagar, who works for the Manchester Bus Company. So he has a problem not with really the company, but really with the unions. So he's denied a job as a bus conductor. He's not allowed to have contact with the British public. He's only allowed to work in the garages, and this violates the turban violates uniform policies of the company. In particular, it's a form of exclusion by the unions. So there is this case sets a precedence for all other Sikhs. And in 1966, the Manchester City Corporation reverses the decision and allows Singh Sagar to become a bus conductor. And of course, the next case in 67, which is a year later, so Tarsem Singh Sandhu, who's working in Wolverhampton on the buses in the bus company. So of course, this this has an effect, and we can see the areas or the fields of which are lacking in employment in the 1960s in post Second World War Britain. So construction industry also, but the bus companies, transport systems. Sandhu also has a problem. He's fired. He's wearing a turban when he returns to work, so he's fired. This leads to mass demonstrations across the country, and it also gains international attention. So it crosses borders. The diaspora is very active, and in India they start demonstrating as well. So the campaign pressures employees and unions to accept turbans in workplaces. Really, the most important case, which is decisive of the existence of Sikhs as an ethno-religious group, because obviously Sikhs today are recognized as an ethno-religious group. So it defines Sikhs. So the famous Mandla v. Dowell Lee case. So this is a Sikh schoolboy who is denied admission to a school because he's wearing a turban, and this also violates internal school policies on uniforms. The House of Lords rules that Sikhs are in fact an ethnic group, and so therefore must be covered under the Race Relations Act of 1976. Which doesn't actually protect religions, but it protects ethnic groups. This the recognition, it enshrines Sikhs. It's a landmark case historically, and also determines. So Sikhs are considered as an ethnic group by the House of Lords because they speak the same language, because they have more or less the same culture, because they practice endogamy, and all of these elements contribute to their recognition as an ethnic group, and they come from the same geographic place, more or less, which is denied later on to other people. So Sikhs, apart from those cases there, Sikhs also benefit from major exemptions in British law, such as the motorcycle helmet exemption case, 1976. So they lobby Parliament, they become very active and place pressure in the 1970s on, which of course must be taken into consideration of the economic instability at that period of time of the United Kingdom, and so they gain an exemption that if the turban, if religious clothing doesn't allow to wear the motorcycle helmet, a motorcycle helmet, then you're exempt from being forced to wear it. You must be a practicing Sikh to do that. So also the construction helmet exemption case. So this brings into question workplace safety, that Sikhs cannot be forced to, in the 1980s, cannot be forced to wear hard hats on construction sites. They can continue wearing turbans. There are other since with technology, motorcycle helmets have been developed, which allow Sikhs, or special types of turban have been developed in order to allow Sikhs to ride motorcycles with greater safety. But the most recent case, and the last case that has taken place, concerned a girl. So this is the only female that has been involved in what are traditionally called turban campaigns, although this doesn't involve a turban. This involves the kara, which is the bracelet. So it's in a school in Wales. Sarika Angela Watkins Singh was, I was unable to locate her on any social media. It was impossible to get in contact with her, which is a shame. So she was wearing a kara, which is a steel bracelet, or a metal bracelet, which is worn by Sikhs. This didn't fit in with school regulations. She won her case because against the school in Aberdale, because Sikhs are an ethno-religious group, which is, by contrast, in 2017, Shabina Begum at Denby High School in Luton lost her case. She was refused to wear her jihab because it was deemed to be only a religious clothing, and Muslims were not considered to be an ethno-religious group because they came from such a diverse geographic area, and therefore they didn't live in the same way or have the same ethnic origins that Sikhs were deemed to have. So in the book, in the conclusion, I deal with why Sikhs might have been so successful in the United Kingdom by comparison with and having all of these exemptions. So I think that it's various things such as great economic turmoil, a period of time that Sikhs arrived in the United Kingdom. And of course, at the time there is already this perhaps what will become the polarizing debate on immigration, fueled by the speeches of Enoch Powell, Rivers of Blood, etc. So a desire politically to concentrate on those who are already in the United Kingdom rather than those who are going to enter it. So there's a kind of idea of providing the Sikhs with something in order for them to integrate in a much better way in the United Kingdom. There's also, in political circles, there's great worry about what results might occur if the Sikhs, their demonstrations escalate. And of course, Sikhs are highly concentrated in certain areas, which contributes to unity of those people. And despite, and it shouldn't be forgotten that there's no unifying body for Sikhs, really, and Sikhs are not necessarily in agreement over certain things, such as the recent referendums or how to act in or questions of immigration. But they certainly, in the turban campaigns, they unite collectively to defend that common symbol, which has become associated with their identity. So to finish off, Vincent, if you could go on to the next slide, please. So to finish off, Sikhs have also always been a minority. So therefore, they have some form of collective mechanism of protection that exists. They lobby politicians very well, which the French Sikhs have great difficulty in doing. Anglo-Sikh relations are much greater, despite the concentration of French Sikhs point out that a high number of Sikhs died in World War I and World War II on French soil and are buried in French cemeteries dedicated to the Indian Army. But there are a high number of people who have the name Singh who are buried in those cemeteries. And there's a constant, or this is put forward systematically. So also, despite the fact in Britain that so Sikhs in Britain are more numerous, they're localized in the same place, they're less numerous in France, but located more or less in the same place, but far greater numbers. In both cases, during these turban campaigns, this fuels international debate. So there are demonstrations during the campaigns in France against the French state. There are demonstrations that take place outside embassies in Delhi, New Delhi, for example. The community in India, also the Sikh community, also demonstrates to defend that right to wear the turban. So that obviously joining together, Sikhs have everything to gain in the diaspora, despite maybe some disagreements over certain things or how to do it. They have everything to gain, in particular their separatist desires in India and the founding, which is becoming more and more present. So I'll just very quickly run through the interviews that I carried out, which you will see here, so both in the United Kingdom and in France. So the interviews that are varied. That the majority of Sikhs that I contacted in the United Kingdom were obviously not involved in the court cases because sometimes they were too old at the time that the cases took place. But I managed to contact various people such as Bhupinder Singh Bans, who is a historian and author of Sikh history, Ranjit Singh, obviously in France, who is the first to prosecute nationally the French state, not internationally. But I spoke to people like Raman Singh, who is a Sikh engineer, so people who have high-end positions and they're their impressions of living in France. I also spoke to people such as Lord Indarjit Singh, who is the first UK Sikh to sit in the House of Lords. Atma Singh I interviewed, who was the special advisor under Ken Livingstone to the Mayor of London while he was Mayor of London, who actually lives in France. So he gave his opinion on both sides of the story. I spoke to a journalist, and in particular the author of a very interesting book, Hardeep Singh, who worked with Jagbir Jyoti Johal, who is an Asian Studies professor at Birmingham University, on the case of mistaken identity of Sikhs, and in particular how the police record how they record attacks on Sikhs. The police actually in Britain records what they perceive as being the reason behind, whether that person is a Sikh or not. If they believe that it was because the person was mistaken for a Muslim, then it's recorded as a Muslim hate crime rather than a Sikh hate crime. So Singh and Jyoti Johal have proved or shown that there are perhaps 25% of cases of Sikh attacks that go undetected. I spoke to Majinder Paul Singh, who is the international legal director of the organization United Sikhs, which financed all of the court cases in France. I spoke to Harpal Singh, who was involved in the Rumal case in Goussainville. I also spoke to Nina Kaur-Gill, who's the first Sikh elected to the EU Parliament, Labour EMP. I also visited the Singh Sabha Gurdwara in Saint-Denis, and had the possibility of interviewing on 2 occasions a dozen Sikhs on both occasions. Related to their impressions of going to school. I spoke to Bikramjit Singh, who was expelled from the Bobigny secondary school, and also to Sukhofil. So the comparison, what does the book do? The book makes a comparison of Sikhs in the UK and France, and in particular the court cases are brought together for the first time. It's supplemented by contemporary newspaper reports. So interestingly, how in the 1950s, 1960s, the British newspapers reported on the court cases involving Singh Sagar, for example. I use, of course, extracts from the interviews that I carried out of both prominent Sikhs in the UK, which shows to some extent the integration, the successful integration of Sikhs in the United Kingdom, and those who were involved in the legal cases in France, who have become successful people, businessmen, engineers, etc., and also from the Sikh community in Saint-Denis, so school children. And so, as Romain, you said at the beginning, so the book will be published under the same title as this presentation at some point by Routledge India in 2025. So thank you very much for inviting me. I'd welcome any comments or questions that you might have with pleasure. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Andrew.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Yes, that was great. That was a fascinating story of the Sikhs. Does anybody have any question or remark that they want to start with? Please feel free. Vincent, go ahead.
I have one, but I'm biased, of course.
Yes.
Because
We'll have
obviously,
a continuation of the supervisor.
well, yeah, I've been familiar with, obviously, with Andrew research for a number of years, but I still find it fascinating, and having everything put together in a short, in a short moment like this, in about 45 minutes is very good, because it gives very interesting perspectives. I was struck by what you said, Andrew, in relation to why British Sikhs were so successful in terms of, advancing their agenda in the 1960s and 70s. So you mentioned I think you used the expression economic turmoil in the 1960s. Then obviously the backlash created by Powell's speech in 1968, which specifically mentioned the Sikhs, by the way, not just immigrants in general, but Sikhs from his constituency in Wolverhampton. And then there's something you didn't mention, but which obviously came during the same period. It was the shaping of the. I mean, this happened. All these turban campaigns, which started in the 1950s, accelerated and sort of gained momentum in the 1960s when the race relations legislation was being framed in the UK. And I was thinking that obviously the Sikhs might have benefited from that legislation, but that interestingly, that contributed to shaping it. And this is typical with the Mandela case of 1983, which actually would never have been possible without the 1976 Race Relations Act. But on the other hand, the concept of indirect discrimination probably wouldn't have been what it became without the Sikhs and their contribution in the 1960s. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, and that's often, I'm not certain that the Sikhs forget that, but that's often forgotten. You know, these are reasons once again why I think the Sikhs are pretty unique in terms of their contribution and their cohesiveness and how they have contributed to both shaping, as you say, the Race Relations Act. So because all of that's taking place at the same time, so they obviously have an impact on that. But also, as you say, it's in a two-way direction. I think that they benefit from the way that it is shaped, and the fear, perhaps, in political circles that this might get out of control. I mean, there are huge demonstrations that take place across the country. You know, the Sikhs are marching together. They're lobbying ministers. They're lobbying politicians. And I think that. Yeah, definitely. It's Sikhs are pretty much unique in that respect, and it's often little spoken about. I think, but they definitely contribute. Absolutely, it's very interesting.
Can I just comment on that? Because it's interesting when you say how strong they are when they're very unified in protesting. When Ireland back in the mid-noughties opened up the Irish police force to people who did not have Irish nationality, there was a question at the time, well, if you take people in, what is going to be your approach to things like religious dress? Will police be allowed to wear a veil or a turban or whatever? And initially, they didn't really know. And then they said, yeah. And then when people were actually hired, suddenly they said, oh, no, you can't. And, these people had gone through the whole recruitment process and everything, haven't been reassured about this. And one of them was a Sikh. And the British Sikhs arrived en masse into the media and campaigned. And within a week, the guy was allowed to wear his turban with the badge of the police force at the front of it. And that was the end of that. And it was really, there weren't enough of them in Ireland to campaign, but it was impressive how they came en bloc,
Yeah, I think, that's really interesting that you tell that story. That, I think it's exemplary of how Sikhs, even if they might disagree, as I say, on certain aspects, the turban is the center of the unifying element of that community, and they're prepared. They will move on, as you say, en masse and voice their opinions because I think historically they have been so successful, and so they realize, therefore, that they can do something by acting together, and because they have this recognition and this power and the roles that they have played historically, in the British Empire and in world wars and in the army. I think they feel as if they should get something back in return, and they do systematically. I think they're unique once again in their cohesiveness of how they act together. Definitely.
All right. Thanks, Andrew, for the response. And thanks to the questions by Vincent and Barbara. Is there any other question or remark?
Well, I have a very short one, unless you have one yourself, Romain.
I do, but go ahead. I'll ask myself.
No, it's just I was struck by the fact that you mentioned Bernadette Chirac's intervention to allow a nun to wear, a Catholic veil on her driving license. And well, what I find especially outrageous is that Bernadette Chirac didn't have a popular mandate to do that.
No.
So I'm pretty surprised. I mean, she had no political function, and I'm surprised that the French state, actually listened to the wife of the French president of the time and accepted to break the law, basically. Because she had no, there was no justification for that, except the fact that she was a staunch Roman Catholic. Well, that's it.
Yeah, I find that very interesting as well. The exceptions that are made in secularism for, okay, it's one person, but then afterwards that sets a precedence for others. And there are cases that exist like that. So I think Sister Adalberta is a good one in particular because it's taking place in 2003. So the discussions of laïcité and they are taking place in 2003. That question is being raised as to the fact that schools shouldn't apply. There should be no religious clothing that should be allowed. And in fact, when I spoke to Lord Indarjit Singh, he's invited by Bernard Stasi. When Bernard Stasi for the Stasi report arrives in the UK, he's invited to lunch, and he says across the table to Bernard Stasi, and he says that do you realise that Sikhs will be at the brunt of, even if they are perhaps not the object of this law, they will be at the brunt of it. They will suffer from the consequences. And Lord Indarjit Singh states that the response is that are there Sikhs in France? And they're not really aware that there are Sikhs in France at the time. And there is kind of Lord Indarjit Singh gets a kind of a promise that Sikhs will get a special exemption from that law, but of course they don't get that. So I find that quite interesting from Indarjit Singh's perspective of 2003, 2004, the discussions.
Yes, indeed.
That's fascinating that they said there would be exceptions, which only goes to say openly that there was only one target for that law.
Yeah.
That's right.
If I can add something, I know that because I met also Bikramjit and the other Sikh who has been expelled in 2004, and they received a letter from the service of the Prime Minister telling them, "Don't worry, there will be an exception for you." But the thing is, when they arrived to their high school, the director said, "No, you can't." So yes, there should have been an exception, but it wasn't written in the law because of laicity, of course. So
yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. It looks like it's suggesting that Sikhs in France don't have the same capacity or ability to mobilize as they do in Britain, perhaps.
Well, they mobilized a lot, like because it was only 3 students were expelled, but like it was nobody thought they were there was Sikh in France before this. So I think the mobilization is like huge, but because of laicity, in France you can have treat a religion in a different way from another. So it was too complicated to make an exception. It was against the law. That's what I think. But
yeah, interesting. Thanks.
No, I think obviously there is less, obviously because of the numbers, and also because of the historic ties, and even if Sikhs in France do mobilize, their prosecutions are not the same. They're prosecuting the French state. So it's much more difficult, I think, to prosecute a state. You're taking on a whole entity rather than just a school and a bus company, and I think that it's easier to put pressure on on smaller entities, but on a nation state, I think that's, and in particular France, which, you know, has a pretty inflexible tendency towards secularism. I think that it becomes simply impossible, and you know, Sikhs kind of. How will that develop in the future? I think, you know, that's a question that is raised, especially with, you know, politics going towards more the right wing. Then what will happen in the future? You know, can we imagine a time when religion might be, you know, religious symbols might be outlawed completely wherever they are and whatever they are in public spaces in the future? Sikhs that I've spoken to systematically say whatever happens, they have no issues with the country in which they live and that they will adapt to that situation. You know, they have kind of a model migrant image, which is not without its problems. Of course, being a model migrant is problematic when you don't fit into, when you don't make lots of money and don't have property, which you're supposed to, according to statistics, have, for example, or you're not successful.
I think it's, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
Please.
I think my name is Sharon, by the way. I'm at University of Bristol.
Right.
I think it's interesting listening to the conversation and also thinking about the presentation. Because on the one hand, we have this idea of mobilization, kind of like the social movement, see it's coming together. But then I think listening that it's not really a question of mobilization, it's a question of the state, of what they're able to do within given states. So we tell the story of the UK in the 60s, 70s, 80s, because state mechanisms have made it possible for their voice to be heard within the state, the story of Ireland, etc. And as you say, within France, you can mobilize till you're blue in the face. But because the state understands itself in a certain way, therefore, as you said, it makes it harder for change. And then as we go forward and we look at how states are changing, it only takes, I mean, in the UK at the moment, we think, oh yeah, it's great, but it won't always be that way. It just takes a tweak here, a change there, and then all the mobilization in the world that you could do is not. So I don't know. So I'm just feeling that your story is more a story of the state rather than the story of group movement or social movement, because it really depends upon where they're doing their movement, so to speak.
Absolutely, definitely. And the period of time, you know, obviously now I think the you know, the period of time of when the Sikhs, it can't be denied that they mobilize immensely, and the British have, or the British government in the 60s and the 70s there are too many problems on other fronts, dealing with other issues, economic issues, and you know, they kind of become afraid that they're dealing with unions and demonstrations from all fronts, so they kind of believe that Sikhs, because of their cohesiveness, might become problematic. So, as you say, they change or provide exemptions and exceptions to laws, which then are afterwards used in order to contribute to the mobilization, because obviously they have that possibility. But I agree with you also on the fact that things could change. You know, often people think that things are like the way they are, and they will never change. Of course, identity changes, and national identities develop, and may become stricter or not so, depending on the time. And so that doesn't mean to say that Sikhs who have the possibility today of having those exemptions, that they will always exist. And it could take, as you say, something very simple to stop that. Which I also think contributes to the continued mobilization of Sikhs and the cohesiveness on certain fronts. They feel that it's a very important issue for them that they're not prepared to drop, at least in Britain. In France, that's not the case.
Yeah. Thanks, Sharon, and thanks, Andrew. That was a very interesting, stimulating discussion. I don't think we have much time. Well, no, we have 10 minutes left. So I'm going to squeeze in the little question I've had in mind since the very beginning of your talk, because you said something maybe not so central to your presentation today, but something that intrigued me. I was interested in knowing a little bit more about why, if I understood you correctly, the largest Sikh population in Western Europe is actually in Italy. So why is that? Can you give us a bit more explanations on that?
Well, I think it's revealing of also, the French school children when they're expelled or they decide to leave for the schools where they have issues post 2004. I think that they obviously afterwards they go to schools outside of the education system, the state education system, and they go to schools that are Catholic. So I think that they feel that they have some freedom of religion within a religious environment. So I don't know, because I've not studied Sikhs in Italy, but I would imagine, hazard a guess, that perhaps because it is a religious state, or there is a connection with religion, that they feel that perhaps it's possible. But of course, that seems surprising against the backdrop of what we know about Italy and Italy's policies on immigration in recent years in particular, that it doesn't seem to fit in with that. But there are, high numbers of Sikhs also here. I can't remember exactly, but I think that the second state might be Spain. So I think that, the fact that those two have Catholic traditions and obviously it's different to France, which has a Catholic tradition, but has moved since 1905 to secularism. So, perhaps the less central role of religion in France and separation of the state, whereas in Italy and Spain, perhaps there is a greater connection with religion in public life. Perhaps there's a belief that they feel more at home in a religious or have greater freedom. That Sikhs have come to realize that since the 1980s and the 1990s that, well, secularism exists, which hasn't stopped Sikhs wishing to come here. They are still arriving here. The majority of Sikhs in Rouen, for example, have decided to remove their turbans, cut their hair. So they're considered to be lapsed Sikhs. They're still Sikhs, but they're considered to be lapsed Sikhs. They're not barred from going to the Gurdwaras, but the majority of them don't wear turbans and therefore work freely, but and have no issues with that. I've spoken to one Sikh who wears a turban in Rouen.
I think Vincent wants to add something.
Now, well, just one final thing. I agree with you about maybe the role played by religion in Italy, which might explain why, basically Sikhs have settled there in recent years or decades. I went to Portugal 2 years ago, and I was very surprised by the size of the Sikh community in Lisbon. It's very impressive, actually. I had no idea that there would be so many Sikhs there as well. But in relation of the Sikhs' entry in settlement in Italy, Spain, or Portugal, I think it has more to do with the sort of less strict immigration rules that prevailed there at some point, when it became almost impossible to settle in the UK or in France. It was still easier to settle in these countries that used to be countries of emigration, and that very quickly were turned into countries of immigration from the late 1980s onward. And I suppose the same goes for Ireland, which became a country of immigration in very few years. Right?
Yeah.
But anyways, just a thought.
I think it's an interesting thought. Sorry, Andrew. Sorry, I cut you off. Please.
No. I was just going to agree with Vincent that I found it interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it makes me think of something. I'd be curious to know if the Sikh immigration to France started from 1962 onwards, when the Commonwealth Immigrants Act starts to be implemented in Britain, and there's an increase. There's a short-term increase in migration to Britain from post-colonial countries of origin, the beat the ban phenomenon. But very quickly in the subsequent years, in the 60s, we see that there's a lot of post-colonial British populations who start migrating to other Western European countries because of the 62 Commonwealth Immigrants Act. And one example is the Pakistanis, who started arriving in France after 62 because of that. So I'm wondering if the same phenomenon might have happened for the Sikhs in France, and maybe beyond in Germany, Italy, or Spain or Portugal, since Vincent tells us he thinks there's a big presence in the south of Europe.
Yeah. I mean, the majority of research on migration states that the largest numbers start arriving in the 80s and the 90s,
right,
post Operation Blue Star. But you know, if it states, the research states that the largest numbers start arriving then I think I would say that probably they arrived before, but in very smaller, much smaller numbers. You know, I mean, I know that Ranjit Singh, arriving in the 1980s, is considered as being one of the pioneers of Sikh migration to France. You know, this is the founding of the Gurdwaras, and I haven't spoken to anybody that arrived in the 1960s, but it's an interesting,
right,
perhaps avenue to look at, definitely.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. Right, if there aren't any more questions, I think we're going to conclude our session on Andrew's forthcoming book with Routledge India on the Sikhs. Thanks everybody for participating. There weren't many of us, but you know, it was a quality group nonetheless. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and we hope to see you for our next session, which Vincent can remind us.
Yeah. So the next session will be actually organized by our partners from Bristol. It's on the 5th of March. That is Wednesday, 5th of March at 5 o'clock French time, which is 4 o'clock UK time. And there'll be a presentation by Dr. Dagmar Mysliska. I don't actually have the title in mind, but I will actually forward it, through the SOS or the CRESIB. And then our next sort of homegrown session will take place on the 14th of March with the presentation of our colleague, Dr. Nada Afuni from Le Havre University. And she'll be doing a comparative presentation based on a study of the municipal cemeteries of Southampton and Le Havre in relation to their respective Muslim communities. Okay.
What time is that on, that particular one?
That one, so sorry, let me check. It's on the 14th of March.
Yeah.
And that will be so I don't know. Yeah. So it's on Monday. And it should be, I think, at 10 or 11.
The 14th of March is a Friday.
Sorry, so 14th of March, sorry, yes. Okay, well, I'll actually send you a message, right?
Okay.
So I think you're right, it's on the 10th, actually.
All right. Oh, yeah, no, I've written it down on the 10th.
So
Yeah, it's at 11. It's at
no,
11.
No, I'm sorry, it's, I'll clarify this, I'm sorry.
Yeah. We'll do everything, all of that by email.
Just bringing confusion.
Everybody will get the exact information by email. No worries. Yeah. Thanks, Vincent. Right.
Very much.
Thank you again, everybody.
Well, thank you very much.
Bye. Thanks, Andrew. That was brilliant.
Oh, thank you.